YouTube. Today we're building an end grain cutting board. I know there are a million videos out on YouTube on cutting boards, so I really do appreciate you spending your time with me. Okay, so cutting boards in general are a pretty straightforward process to build. You got to mill your lumber, you got to cut it to length, you got to glue those pieces together, you got to do a lot of sanding, and then you can add things like a juice groove or feet to the board if that's something that you want. Now an end grain cutting board, that adds a layer of complexity to the process, but it's still not that bad, as you'll see. So, why do people prefer end grains as opposed to a face grain or an edge grain? Well, it's gentler on your knife. I don't necessarily have that problem because my knife block, I think I spent $100 at Target. My knives are not terribly expensive, but you could spend over $500 on a single knife if you wanted to. So a lot of people want to have a cutting board that's going to be gentler on their knife and not dull it as quickly. Now let me just go over a couple things before we get into the build. There's basically three types of wood cutting boards. You have a face grain, an edge grain, and an end grain, which is what we're doing today. Now when you're chopping on the face or on the edge, that's extremely hard, and it's going to dull your knife very quickly, as opposed to the end grain. Now why is the end grain gentler? Let me show you. I have a prop here, spaghetti. When you're chopping on an end grain, those wood fibers actually separate and allows the knife to penetrate the wood. Furthermore, when you pull back the knife, those same wood fibers, they join back together. And it's that self-healing process that protects the longevity of the cutting board and ensures that your knife doesn't get dull. And that's why chefs and others prefer an end grain as opposed to the other types. So, let's get busy and build this sucker. So the wood I'm using is hard maple and cherry, and I have them alternating. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of maple, and I have 6 of cherry. One thing that's really important is you have to adjust the grain of the board. You can't have the grain going the same way. If it's all going the same way, then the board can have a tendency to cup, and you don't want that. So here my grain is going down, and then the next one it's going across, and the next one it's going up. So you want to alternate the direction of the grain every single board.
It's been a while since I've had to glue up any boards, and as you can see, I used way too much glue. But don't worry, going forward we're going to fix this. On a positive note, the squeeze out looks even across the length of the board, which means that the glue panel system is applying even pressure and the boards are milled properly. You may have noticed that the squeeze out is missing. So what I did the night before, about 20-25 minutes after I applied pressure, I came back and I removed the squeeze out using an old chisel on the front. Unfortunately, I was not able to access the back to do the same thing. So we're going to take care of a lot of that dried squeeze out now. The drum sander does a great job at removing the dried on squeeze out. To be honest, if I didn't have this drum sander, I probably would have pitched this block of wood because it would have taken all day with a random orbital sander, and ain't nobody got time for that. We are now cutting the board into strips. The width of each cut will determine the thickness of the cutting board. It will also determine the width of the cutting board. So just keep in mind that some math is going to be involved here. This is my Crosscut sled. I'm going to leave a card here so you can learn how to build one yourself if you're interested. So this is where the batteries to my wireless mic died. So what I'm doing here is I'm cutting finger grooves on the shaper table, and I'm using a 1-inch cove bit. Here I'm just softening the sharp edges on the top of the cutting board. I'm using my router with a roundover bit. Okay, it's time to do a little sanding. Here I start out with 100 grit and I finish with 220. Alright, what I'm doing here is I'm hitting the cutting board with water. And what this does is it raises the wood fibers. And when it dries, I'm going to hit it again with 220 grit. This is an important step to making the board really smooth. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm cutting a juice groove around the perimeter of the cutting board. The groove is about 3/4 of an inch from the edge, and I'm using a 5/8 inch round nose bit. I made this jig because this is an extremely difficult cut and it can easily ruin all of your hard work. If you're interested in building your own juice groove jig, I should have a card here and hopefully it'll help you out. This is the favorite part of the build for me, applying the mineral oil. The mineral oil really changes the character of the board, and it's beautiful.
Okay, so what did you guys think? As I mentioned before, it's not too technical, it's pretty straightforward, but with the end grain cutting board, there's a lot of labor involved because of the multiple glue ups. I made a couple of mistakes, hopefully you won't catch on to it, but for those who did catch on to it, I know you're gonna let me know. This reminds me, if you're in the market for a cutting board and you're online and you're shopping and you see an end grain cutting board for $50, that's not this cutting board. This cutting board is a substantial cutting board. It probably weighs 6 or 7 pounds. It's almost 1.5 inches thick. It's got the juice groove. It's got the feet on here. So when you see your local craftsman selling an end grain cutting board that's north of $50, there's a reason for that. A lot of labor goes into these small little cutting boards. So just keep that in mind. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed watching this. I sure as heck enjoyed building it. If you haven't done so, I really appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and we'll see you next time, guys. Take care.